Yeah, hello and welcome to our last lecture of the lecture series, Climate Protection. Yeah, today we have two lectures in one. So Jana Kesenheimer and Matthias Gondan-Rochon will present two lectures. So Jana will start. Jana Kesenheim works as a postdoc researcher and lecturer at the Department of Social Psychology at the University of Innsbruck. Her research interest is on investigation of determinants for pro-environmental behavior. And on this topic, her lecture of today is also. The lecture is called Looking Forward. We are looking forward to the lecture, Psychology for a Sustainable Future, Exploring the Human Dimension of Climate Change. Welcome, Jana Kesenheimer.
Okay, thank you, Rainer, for the introduction, and also thank you everyone who is here. Although we have fresh snow outside, so I think that psychology is a topic that is often overlooked when it comes to mitigating climate change. But maybe this is why I'm so excited to talk to you about this today. And I hope that I can give you a little insight into the toolbox that psychology has to offer when it comes to climate change. And first, I'm aware that a lot of you will come from really different fields, so I will just really briefly give you an introduction in what environmental psychology actually means. And when talking about this research field, we usually have this interaction between human and the environment. And in psychology, we focus on individual cognition, emotion, behavior, and motivation. And on the other side, we see that we as human beings have apparently a really big impact on our environment, as we can see through climate change, for example. And the other way around, we see that also the environment has quite an impact on us. So let's say that instead of being in this big Audimax here, it could be that we will be in a tiny room or whatever, and this will completely change the way you will perceive me talking or the way you perceive the information that we are sharing. So it's always an interaction between our environment and us on the human side. And generally speaking, in environmental psychology, could be that this environment is not just ecologically perceived, but also on a social level, on a cultural level, on a physical level, as speaking of the room we are in. But today we are strictly focusing on the direction here, like the impact us as human beings have on our ecological environment. When it comes to speaking about the impact of humans on the environment, I think it's not just a debate in the research of environmental psychology, but also on a society level about the significance we as individuals have. And speaking of environmental psychology, it's also called the holy grail of this movement to focus on individual behavior. First, I mean, it's the nature of psychology. But we also have to admit that sometimes, like big companies, as you all know, BP invented this carbon footprint calculator. This sometimes shifts the pressure away from big companies onto individuals, which might be, questionable, let's say. And I don't want to blame individuals today, but still I want to talk about how individual behavior can still matter in the context of climate crisis. And there's an interesting study from already 2012 saying that all of the people who are active on a collective level, let's say people who are part of Extinction Rebellion or Fridays for Future, they are also active on this individual level. Let's say they follow a vegan or vegetarian diet to reduce their own carbon footprint. But the other way around, it's not always true. So not all of us who try to do our best in mitigating climate change are also active on a collective level. And still I see that these forms or types of behavior, they do not contradict each other. So I think there can be one without the other, and they are both beneficial in mitigating climate change. I want to give you as I find, quite impressive example. Talking about nutrition, we see that less than 1% of the global population is vegetarian by choice. And even if we add those who are vegetarian not by choice, but because they cannot afford to eat meat, it still comes to less than 2%. So we have like a huge reach here. As we see that food systems can contribute to almost 30% of global carbon emissions. So there's huge potential in, for example, this nutrition field, and as I see it, individuals matter in this perspective. Sometimes this can lead to, let's say, an oversimplification of the problem, as for example, the New York Times plotted that we could save the planet by putting down that burger. I would not agree with that, but still it kind of shows that, there is a potential here. And now this is the point where psychology comes into play, because all of these individual behaviors which are plotted here, I hope that you can see these tiny mentions. For example, we could turn off the lights every day, let's say, or we can cut down on flying, or vote an environmental policy, or sign a petition about environmental issues. Also, we can insulate our homes better, or use energy efficient heating systems. And all of this behavior on this matrix here, they are estimations by people as you and me, not being experts in the field. And what we see is that people who are not experts usually overestimate the impacts of these little behaviors. Like sticking with the example of turning off the lights, people usually overestimate this impact, and expert would say this is not making a huge impact at all. So it would make a difference even if all of us would turn out the lights every day at home. It would be way better if all of us would change the heating system, or maybe cut down on flying. And these collective actions, which I just talked about, they are actually really important because they enforce a system change. But we as individuals, as not being experts, we really underestimate their impact. So what you see here is the subjective perception of how impactful these behaviors are, and experts would not agree with this. And I think this is where psychology first shows that even though we might have good intentions, it might not always actually be good. So I asked myself, and a lot of other researchers also asked themselves, why this is the case. And psychology has a lot of answers to offer here. So there is really prominent this self-affirmation theory, which can act like a psychological immune system. So each of us want to maintain a positive self-image. So we don't want to be sinners. We want to uphold a positive image of ourselves. And when we are aware that there's climate change and still we don't really want to, let's say, change our diets or cut down on this holiday, we might say, oh, at least I turned off the lights today, or just to maybe be a little ironic here. So by overestimating the impact of this little everyday behavior, we can reduce this cognitive dissonance. This is how it's called in psychology. So it's a gap between what we know we should do and how we actually behave. And you see the point here. It's about keeping a positive self-image. But also we know in psychology that these terms of eco-anxiety, eco-paralysis, and perceived helplessness are increasing. So a lot of people are really worried about the state we are in climate change. Of course, I would share this view too. And by doing at least something, this can give us a feeling of autonomy, of competence, and maybe increase our self-efficiency here. So maybe it's good for our health to overestimate our own impact. And still, I think that we could do a bit better by focusing on system change, or focusing on a more political level. What is a little bit funny, a little bit sad too, is that this can lead to I think misfindings also in research. For example, people with really high socioeconomic status, they usually self-report in questionnaires that they are really pro-environmental. So let's say a family on a countryside having big housing, 2 cars, a lot of financial resources, let's say they have proper financial resources and education, and they would answer on these questionnaires that we usually use in psychology as having high or strong pro-environmental attitudes. However, if you look at their carbon footprint, it might actually be quite bad compared to people with less resources. So this brings me to the point, like, how can we measure environmental attitudes and behavior in psychology? The easiest way is, as I just said it, to ask people, like to use self-reports, and this is also the most common version that we use in psychology research, because we can reach out to a lot of people. So for example, you can ask people if they would accept an environmental surcharge of 50 cents for their gasoline. And as I already said, it's a problem we have here. So there are other methods to use. One is experience sampling. So this means that we ask people day by day for several days to report on their real life behavior and attitudes over and over again to be like closer to everyday life. Still, this has the problem that it's self-reports. So what other researchers try to do is to have these more implicit tasks. And this one here is that participants have to really fill out this dump exercise of crossing all the digits which are even on the first digit and odd on the second digit, and they can choose how many pages they want to complete, and for every page they complete, the organizations of the study, they will donate a specific amount of money. So it's kind of implicit measure of how much effort the participants put into this task to be pro-environmental. So at least this has some kind of cost, and it might be easier to cheat than with self-reports, but still it's not really everyday life to do this task, right? So the last method I'm now talking about is observations, and this might be obvious. We can use, for example, smart meters to measure energy resources at home, so how much energy you are using. Or at the study I put here is that in a university cafe, they simply counted how many reusable cups were taken by the students after and before having an intervention. So sometimes behavior can easily be visible and measured, but still it's really specific. So I hope that I hope that you understand now, like, how environmental psychology research can work and what is the benefits and maybe the disadvantages of it. And now as Rainer said, I'm a social psychologist. I now want to bridge this gap from this individual behavior to a more collective measure. And I think the good answer is, or the good point here is that we are social, not meaning that we are pro-social always, but I think we all interact. And people are really prone to be affected by what other people do. And I brought a picture here. It was a master student of mine. She had a bachelor student actually. She did a study last year on the beaches in Naples because she did an Erasmus there. And she put this sign there at the beach saying that more and more people showering were saving water for the sake of the environment. And I mean, it's a really simple intervention, right? It was really low cost to put it there. And what we saw just by investigating a specific amount of time at this beach, we saw that the reduction of the shower time was 35%. And what she stated here is called a dynamic norm. So we say that more and more people are showing a specific behavior, and people are social, this is what I mean, and want to be part of this trend. So even though it's a minority showing this behavior to save water, people attended and followed this trend. And I think that this is a really simple, but also, yeah, it was effective measure how we can influence people's behavior. And actually, the owner of the beach here, like it was a private beach in Italy, and they really have problems with having enough water in summer. So they really have to cut down on water. And for him, it was so surprising and positive that he let these signs there. And I hope that they are still there today, because it was such simple to influence the people's behavior there. I want to show you another example, which is about sharks. And the map I brought you here, I recently saw in a magazine, and I found it really impressive because all the gray dots, they show you 1 million sharks killed every year by human beings. And on the other side, you see 8 human beings killed by shark, which are the black dots. And this, yeah, I found it really ironic because we are afraid of sharks, but it should be way more the other way around. This brings me to this field study, which I found really interesting because they did an observation in Hawaii. And what you can see here is a fisher network. So each of these little dots is one fisher, captain or both. And colored in yellow, red, and blue, it's the different ethnicity of these fishers. So there are Vietnamese, Korean, and European Americans who are usually owning these fishing businesses in Hawaii. And now what the study researchers measured is the shark bycatch. So how many sharks were killed by hook of fishing. And what one would expect is that the shark bycatch would depend a lot on the time of the day that the fishing is happening, or the technique used, or the habits of the ethnicity. But what they instead saw, that this network of the fishers, they predicted the shark bycatch a lot. So it's all about this information sharing between different fishers, predicting how much shark bycatch there was. And the researchers in the study, they found out that if all of the fishers would develop the same, or would use the same information as this blue network here uses, then 46,000 sharks could have been saved. So I think it's really impressive that not all of these techniques, but the social information sharing was the main point which predicted a shark bycatch. And for me, this was a really impressive, another example how, social interaction and information sharing can have a huge impact on whole like animal populations as here. Now, I talked about minorities, and I asked myself, how big should this minority be to actually have a change? Like, how big in society should a group be to make a change? And I mean, we have different examples from a historic view. For example, here the nuclear demonstrations in the late 70s in Germany, but we also saw really impressive movements when it comes to racism or feminism. And it was always minorities changing a society opinion. And in an online experiment, which I know is really simplified comparing to a society level, but what the researchers did here is that they let people find names for faces in dyads, so in pairs. And in total, 200 people took part. And after finding a convention for a name, Confederates entered these discussions. And what the researchers changed or manipulated is how many of Confederates brought up a different opinion. So let's say there was, after, 16 rounds, the convention to name this face Paula. And then all of the participants would gain €1 for finding a name. And then the Confederates came in and said, no, she should be called Lisa, whatever. And they played another round and another round and another round. And what the dependent measure was, like how big this group with a different opinion should be so that they like overtook the new name. And what we see here is that this minority always had to have a size of 25% at least. So if the minority was smaller than 25%, the name did not change. And as soon as this minority was bigger than 25%, the name changed. So they found a new convention for a new name. And this might also oversimplify the problem, but it's really cool to see that just 25% can change a convention. And when we bring this on a more society level, it's called social tipping points. And this could maybe be reached when it comes to financial investments. So I linked a list here. It's really interesting. So if you want to have a look on this afterwards, I think all the presentation will be online. It lists the 95% of the polluters consuming oil and gas globally. And there was research showing that if just 10 to 20% of these companies would change their investments, then the whole system would change. So it's really close to what we see in the experiment. It was 25% in this social experiment, and when it comes to this fossil financial investments, it would be kind of the same. So yeah, if you want to blame the companies, I think you should have a look on this list. Now talking about psychology and humans again, and not on this company level, we see that a lot of determinants are interplaying. And now we talked about this social circumstances, like how other people can have an influence on each other when it comes to behavior. But most prominent is also this situational costs. So a carbon tax is, I think, really prominent when it comes to mitigating climate change. However, we also see that when we are talking about cost, it's not only the financial cost that really matter. So when we ask people why, for example, they took the car instead of the bike to go to an appointment, it's not always the financial cost. It's also like, how much time do I need to do it? Is it safe? Do we have an infrastructure to show a specific behavior? Maybe it's raining outside, so I will not take the bike because it's inconvenient. But maybe also it's a habit. I'm a cyclist. I'm always taking my bike, so I will do it. Maybe I will think of the environment and the impact, or I will think that cycling is also good for my health. And maybe I have friends expecting a specific behavior of me. So it's not just about these financial costs, but about really specific, various aspects of a behavior. And I did some research with this, about this with Tobias Greitemeyer, who is also here today. And we asked participants in daily life if they behave pro-environmentally or not, and asked them about the costs and benefits they experienced. And what we saw is that it's highly subjective. So let's say we have one specific behavior, taking the bike instead of the car. And the one person would say, well, this was highly beneficial because I had a great time outside. And another person would say this exactly same behavior would be bad and costly. And what we saw then is that it's a systematic variation. So people who are pro-environmentally, they typically overestimated the benefits and underestimated the costs, whereas people who were less pro-environmentally, they overestimated the costs and underrated the benefits. And this can explain why some of us would then like take the bike or the car. But I found that this whole discussion about how costly behavior should be is a little questionable then, because when we have a price for going green or a price for going harmful, it might not be the same still for everyone. And talking about costs and why these might perceived so differently by each of us, there is one theory called costly signaling, and you see this crab here on top, and it has a really big claw. and it's clumsy and it's not really useful and it takes a lot of energy to grow. So it's kind of ironic that, yeah, evolution put this big claw onto this crab, but still it's beneficial for them because they can show off. They can show that they can, yeah, they can, they can just simply have this big claw. So this access to resources, they might display that they are capable of something. And the signals must be visible to others, and the signals must also be desirable to others. And just in these cases, this cosmic signaling will work. So why I tell you this is that people sometimes also like to show off. And I know that Matthias is having another example on this later, but we also did a study on that, and we distinguished behavior which is selfless, and on the other hand, behavior which is self-serving. So people reported in a diary, again, for 14 days if they behaved pro-environmentally on this specific day, and how and why. And there were answers like, I followed a vegetarian diet today, or I resisted to buy this ananas. So things like this. And then there were these self-serving mentions. For example, I bought new shoes with a cool logo to show that I care about the environment. Or one student even wrote down that he put his reusable bottle on the table in a seminar so that everyone could see that he cared about the environment. And for me, first, it was really impressive that people were that honest. I didn't expect that. But second, it also showed that, I mean, in the end, it might be the nature probably doesn't care why we care about climate change. So if it's useful, why not? But sometimes when it's about consumerism, for example, as the example with the shoes, it might be questionable, right? And yeah, there's this concept of narcissism. So I'm not talking about the personality disorder here, but more, as you can imagine, being the volume turned up, either really minimum or really maximum. Each of us is somewhere here in between. And the personality trait narcissism means that each of us at some level want to be keen to give. So this is the communal side of narcissism, which states like things like I'm the best friend one could ever have. So it's about being pro-social. And there's this other form or type of narcissism, which is called agentic. And it means that people want to show off their skills or what they have and own. So it's mostly about financial or skills they have. And then we saw that people who have this narcissistic tendencies and like to show off, they also show more of this self-serving, egoistic behaviors in everyday life. And it's contradictory maybe, but they show also diminished behavior which is really pro-environmentally or like altruistic in this way. So let's summarize that it's always an influence as you keep the picture of the really beginning, that environment and personality or the human dimension is interacting here. I found this title, Being an Eco-Conscious Superhero, online, and I found it funny, and I think it's not what I would like to claim myself. So I think still, I'm not sure if this is a bad thing. So maybe some people might show some kind of pro-environmental behavior to show off, but does it really matter in the end? I don't know. It's more about if they really care in a long-term way in very different situations. And this, I think, problematic here. Also, when you think of brands, you probably all know, they are playing with this to greenwash the brand or the people who are wearing it. So it can also be some kind of greenwashing sometimes to have a brand on your clothes saying that you are pro-environmental or not. So it's also marketing playing with this, I think. Besides price, there are a lot of other psychological interventions, mostly playing with emotion. You probably noticed this bins in Innsbruck, which say something like "Mülle grazie" here, which is meant to be funny. I don't know, but it helps definitely to put some kind of salience, like attention, onto these bins, and maybe people put more rubbish in that if they see it more easily. So this is how emotions can work. From WWF, I think this tries to evoke some kind of disgust maybe or fear, but these positive and negative emotions often are linked to environmental harmful or friendly behavior. And I noticed this myself because you see the map here. My family is living in Tübingen or close to Tübingen. We are here in Innsbruck, and I can usually try to reach them by car or by train. And when I take the car, it's like a 4-hour travel. When I take the train, it's like a 6 to 8 hour travel. And I mean, you know this game. Deutsche Bahn is not always really easy to travel with. But still, when I go by car, I usually arrive in a really bad mood because I somehow blame myself that I traveled by car. However, when I took the train the next time, I did not really feel good either. So I asked myself if this is a thing, like, are we not proud or more feeling bad when we have these pro-environmental goals? And yeah, we did a study on that, and it's currently under review. But what I can tell you already is that we saw that avoiding these negative emotions can really have can be a huge incentive for us to avoid to go for a greener option. But at the same time, we saw that people sometimes do not care at all. So when we look at taking the car, it's more convenient, it's even cheaper, it takes less time. So some people even felt better about this option, which I don't want to blame. It's objectively okay, I think. But we saw that these relatively positive emotions, which are tied to environmental harmful behaviors, they are the biggest obstacle, even bigger than not expecting positive emotions from going green. So what we concluded is that especially the emotions we have for environmental harmful behavior are really having a huge impact on how we decide. And this is not about just everyday behavior, but maybe also about election behavior, or if we want to be part of an pro-environmental organization or like on this collective level. Okay, so I talked about this environmental psychology toolbox in the beginning, and I quickly want to summarize the insight that I hopefully gave you. So we saw that social networks, as you think of the sharks, they can really have an influence. So if you want to like talk to other people or share your opinion, I think this can make a bigger difference than shutting down your computer every day or turn off the lights every day. Social norms can have an impact on our behavior, as we saw on this dynamic norm at the beach in Naples. Attitudes and personality like shape the way we perceive these issues and also the pro-environmental harmful and friendly behavior. Interventions can play with these kind of emotions, and also visibility of behavior might be an important tool when reaching out to people who show off. And last but not least, I think it's still important to make it easy, to make it safe, to make it healthy, to make it comfortable, to make it beneficial to go green, even though that these costs and benefits might be perceived completely different from one person to another. Okay, so if you have questions now, I'm happy to answer them, and otherwise you can reach out to me. You have my email address here, and happy to hear your questions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jana Kesenheimer. So the Q&A session is opened. If you want to ask something, please raise your hand and I'll give you the mic, that also the online participants can hear you. And for the online participants, you can write in the chat and we read it and announce the question. Yeah, any question from your side? Maybe one icebreaker question from my side. So you mentioned that around 25% change can change the mind of other people too, in a positive way. But do you also think it's the same way around in a negative way? If many people think in a negative way, they trend to guide people in the same direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when you say that, I have immediately the election behavior in mind, like also or other like debates on a society level. When we think of COVID, for example, it was like this, that a minority was really loud, and we had maybe all even the impression that it was way more than a minority speaking up. Yeah, it can be. I think I put it as a good sign here, but maybe we should also be aware that a minority can change a society opinion in a bad way. Yeah. Maybe it might be even more important than to speak up.
Other questions? Just feel free. If you look in the chat, there's no. Yeah, maybe about the positive emotions. Sometimes it goes in line. So if you have things like energy efficient buildings or things like that, which are more comfortable or in a positive and comfortable way, it can guide you in this direction. Do you think it's more important to stress these positive emotions and on the other hand, you can hide the effect on the environment? What do you think? The positive effect on being proud to be in a positive environmental way, or the comfort aspect on energy efficient buildings, for example?
The problem is that we don't need to reach out to the people who are already pro-environmental and voting the right parties and signing are for the right policies, let's say. So I think the problem is to reach out to people who are not. And we saw that these people, like who are not pro-environmental at the moment or not sharing this opinion or attitude, they have rather or relatively positive emotions concerning these negative opinions or behaviors. So we thought of doing an experiment where we want to change these emotions in turn to change the behaviors. So how can we make people feel bad about pro-environmentally bad choices, like about voting a party which is polluting or not mitigating climate change? So how can we reach out to those who are not willing at the moment? And I think it's maybe also on a moral perspective to show that there's a reason to feel bad about it, and also maybe to introduce this kind of negative emotions like guilt and shame that the others like already have. But the problem is that when you want to introduce artificial emotions to people, they usually, or they can react with reactants, like with being controlled, of course. So I think it's a really thin line how you can work with emotions by not losing people on the way.
Thank you. There's an online question saying, would you say that the rate of people with narcissistic tendencies in climate activists is higher than in the average society?
Yeah, this is a question that Matthias is going to present now or later, I don't know.
Okay, then he will answer the question. If there are no further questions to Jana, I would say thank you very much for the presentation. And I would like to say hello to Matthias, starting. Matthias is from the same department, from psychology. He is professor for quantitative methods, and his research interest is on mathematical models of simple perception processes and quantitative methods in psychotherapy research. fundamental question of the extent to which psychological states and properties can be represented by numbers at all. So it's all about number crunching today. So his lecture is on a climate change denialist model of climate activisms. Welcome, welcome, Matthias Gondan.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Rainer, for presenting me already. So you already told about my employment, about my scientific background. I can add that I have some limited experience in climate activism, and my personality might be a bit narcissist. Let's see what is your opinion about it in the later course of these presentations. I start with the very basics about how does psychologists study behavior, and they typically formalize the behavior as a function of some experimental or external conditions A, B, and in the laboratory, of course, we try to keep things simple. So the independent variable is sometimes just one. Of course, there's also some experimental context. What I wanted to outline already at this stage, already with two independent variables, things get surprisingly complicated. But do not fear, this won't be a methods lecture, but I have to add a few introductory remarks about scientific method. That doesn't really, this doesn't just apply to psychology, also to other topics, for example, social sciences in general. And we see a lot of rubbish on the internet, clearly explained, multiple regression. And what I wanted to actually outline is that in psychology and other empirically oriented science, this function of A and B is often a weighted sum. So we see this plus sign very often. I want to come back to this in the later course of this presentation. So for example, in measurement situations, Novaco anger scale, how much does your anger increase if in a hurry to get somewhere you tear your favorite pair of pants from 0 to 4? Or you are talking to someone and they don't listen. And in typical psychological measurement situations, these questionnaire studies, these things are added up. And so we can see the plus sign here in this sum things. And what I wanted to stress, and this is sometimes forgotten in the empirical sciences, meaningful numbers have units. So in physics, no one would add up 3 kilograms and 5 meters. In fact, in psychology, we do sometimes such things. So tearing your favorite pair of pants or getting angry because someone doesn't listen is actually an edge case in such situations. But we can also see, for example, in measurement instruments on pro-environmental behavior, items that would lead to a reduction of 20% in carbon dioxide emissions, and another one would lead to a 40% increase in the use of ecological dishwasher tab, which probably doesn't have any impact on the environment at all. And we often just add up these things. Yeah, sometimes we also kind of subtract them. Yeah, so that we have things like in study 1 we see 20% effect on CO2 emissions. In the other one we see 40%, and there are colleagues who say, well, of course the effect is larger in study 2, although it's environmentally completely irrelevant. Next topic is meta-analysis. You might have heard about this. This is also sometimes the average effects, and this is also not really the best idea to take the average of 3 kilo and 5 meters, if you agree to me. Another thing which I want to mention beforehand is Simpson's paradox. This now refers to regression modeling because that's something that we will see in the later course. You can see a variable x on the one variable on the x-axis and another variable on the y-axis. And please, for a moment, ignore this line. Just notice that we have 4 points here and 4 other points here. And if we want to study the relation between x and y, the best estimate of the regression line is this dashed line. So it's a negative. The higher, the more we see an increase in x, the less we see in y. Yeah? So this is the so-called least squares estimate of the slope of this regression line. So the distance between these dots and the line, or the sum of the quadratic deviations, is minimized. I guess many of you have heard this stuff at school or in your study programs. The thing is, and of course you can see it already, if we add a second explanatory variable, let's say the color of these dots, if we add this explanatory variable to our regression model, the relation, the sign of the relation is actually flipped. So we see a positive relationship between x and y in the subset of the blue people, as well as in the subset of the red people. And what I want to stress is that if you add a relevant variable to such a model, everything may change. Or on the other hand, if you omit a relevant variable from a regression model, everything may change. Yeah? And things get additional complications if we are interested in both of these single explanatory variables, because they might influence each other. So if I have one variable A that has an influence on variable B and both together have an influence on Y, I would do a different analysis as if this arrow between A and B would point in the reverse direction. Yeah? If there is a double arrow, it would again be a different analysis. And if there's no arrow, then we would again do a different analysis. So each of these causal models lead to a different statistical analysis. This is sometimes called the so-called table 2 fallacy. If we put all these variables into the same regression model, I won't go into the details here, but you see that the effect of A and Y and B and Y is estimated in a different way. Here, the models change again. Here, they can't even be estimated. And here, we actually have a choice. Yeah? This is just as a few introductory remarks, because now we get to the studies which I would like to present to you. Just one more thing, sometimes people ask, can't we just say things like, things are related to each other? So to avoid considerations of causal effects like narcissism causes environmental activism, we could in principle just say things like, they are related somehow. Of course we can. It's just not proper science anymore, because it reduces to the no-brainer that everything is somehow related to everything else. Yeah? You will rarely find two variables in psychology which are not related to some extent. And we come back to this topic later. So, suchen, causes, ersetzen is related to, is not an option. Yeah? What could possibly go wrong? I give you an example from Germany. So this is the so-called Valomat, and ask the question, what happens if we ask a few questions and then add up the yes responses to, for example, measure political orientation? Yeah? What do you think? In Austria, this thing is called Wahlkabine. I guess everyone in this lecture hall knows what I'm talking about. So, and in case, I mean, if you don't like it, because you don't think it's serious, please embrace the futures. At least many of my students visit such sites. It asks a number of questions and then adds up your agreement to certain political statements. So what I tried in a little experiment was I tried to impersonate a union member with an ecological interest. In German, I would use the nice composite Gewerkschaftsgrüner or something like this. And in the analysis, what I did, I chose the parties in the German parliament. This is from the last election a few years ago, plus a Nazi party. Yeah, and this is what we found. 63% agreement with the Nazi party, 63% agreement with a left-wing party, 63% agreement with the Green Party, and then a bit less with Social Democrats, Christian Democrats, liberals, and another, well, Nazi party. It depends. And just to warn you, if you pull a horseshoe now and say, well, on the extremes, the political opinions are essentially the same, then you haven't understood the problem. Yeah? The problem is elsewhere. The problem is that this thing does not have an underlying measurement theory. It just adds up the yes responses. And of course, I mean, let's say you want to create a new political movement, a young Nazi party. What would you do? Let's say you would probably game the system in some way, because your target group is people who do the election for the first time. And if there is no proper concept of one wants to measure, then the sum of the yes responses is something else. So for example, they ask things like, should the support for students, in German it's called BAföG, you may know this, the subsidies for the student, should they be paid independently of the income of the parents? And I mean, that thing might be discussed. Obviously, if you want to target first-time voters, you would probably respond yes to this question. You can game such a system by crafting your responses so that it's compatible with first-time voters, and only a few remaining questions would be related to, say, the real political things at stake. So, for example, in none of the 38 questions that Valomat is asking, they ask, do you want to keep a liberal society, a democratic society? This question is simply not being asked. Yeah? Therefore, such things are not, things like the Valomat are in principle broken from the beginning. Don't use them. They are dangerous. Yeah. The other one is a recent study, which is 1 year old, on the dark side, dark personality of climate activists, which is actually yesterday I read an article in the newspaper, and I included it in this presentation in which they refer to this. It's a questionnaire study that investigates the dark side, dark personality of climate activists. And again, I asked the question, what could possibly go wrong? Yeah. What I first noted is, again, there is no theory whatsoever in this study. Yeah. So the introduction is not a structured collection of theorems like in mathematical psychology. It basically refers to other studies who found something which is kind of related. So we see this wonderful word, dark ego vehicle principle. And I must say, I summarized it like this. There's this study, women's rights campaigners are evil, therefore climate activists drive around in dark ego vehicles. I try to make fun of it, but it's remarkably thin. It's basically defamation and suspicion. So there is no theory that makes any predictions in a causal sense. They just think, well, climate activism It may be connected to narcissism in some way, probably not connected to psychopathy, maybe connected to something else, and then cite other articles who have done studies in a sort of similar field. Yeah, but I was actually quite impressed by the low theoretical substance, or by the yeah. The other thing that came to my attention is that it uses self-made indicators of climate activism, basically 2 items in this questionnaire. Measure participation in climate protests. One refers to Fridays for Future, the other one to the last generation, in the first and second quarter of 2023. And according to the data, which actually I obtained from the author, about 10% of the sample reported participation in disruptive climate protest of the last generation in the first half year of 2023. 10%. Yeah? This study claims to be representative. So 10% means that we would have around 8 million activists who engage in disruptive protests in Germany. Where are these people? Who are these people? I haven't seen so many people. I think it's rather a 3, maybe a 4-digit number. Yeah? In Germany, disruptive climate activism is not fun at all. There is substantial backlash and repression by the system and society. Just to illustrate, this is a minor, this is a 16-year-old, which is kept by a policeman's knee. So this is the fun that you experience if you engage in climate activism in Germany. 10%, this number can't be correct. Yeah? The second thing, or the third thing, is the regression model. Now we have, I can show you this climate change denialist model of climate activism. We see as the dependent variable activism measured in this dubious way that I have just illustrated before. And then is a lot of personality, dark personality variables. Machiavellianism, psychopathy, narcissism. 3 more scales which I haven't heard about before. Anti-authoritarianism, AC, I forgot what it is. Top-down censoring, and a few bureaucratic variables like age and gender. And the climate crisis is not even mentioned. Yeah. So this study tries to explain climate activism without taking the climate crisis into account, nor proxies thereof. So things like, are you anxious about what will happen, what will the future be like? Are you worried about climate change? Nothing. Yeah? Just personality variables and age and sex. Yeah? And we have seen before, if you omit a relevant variable from a regression model, everything may change. If you add a relevant variable to a regression model, everything may change. Yeah? So this is the quality of studies that investigate the relation between climate activism and dark personality. So, in fact, I found this actually most shocking in the paper. One thing which I find interesting from a historical perspective, that it's now 50 years ago that research on political activism, psychological research on political activism is now about 50 years old, and it actually started in the area of abnormal psychology. Yeah, this is a book, Mario Diani and Down McAdam, who who tell us that in the 1970s they for the first time, they met the study of social movements in a psychology course on abnormal psychology, which at that time meant kind of studying people with personality disorders. And one thing I might want to add, I find such research basically uninteresting, or it's irrelevant, folks. We have a climate crisis. The personality of climate activists should not be your primary concern. They probably differ from the average because it's really not fun to sit on the street and block the traffic in the morning. Yeah, so it's a no-brainer that they differ from the rest of the population. Yeah, but scientifically, it's completely uninteresting to investigate this, in my opinion. If you have a better answer, let me know. The activists themselves told me the personality of climate activists should really not be your primary concern. Naja. So what should we do instead? I mean, what about if we investigate the general population, not the activists? What about those people? Those people who find it easier to imagine the end of civilization than the end of capitalism, so to say, in 2025 with global warming already at 1.5 degrees. That would be interesting, wouldn't it? So, yeah. As you can see, it's not so innocent. Inconsiderate addition of meaningless numbers may lead us into climate catastrophe and societal collapse. You have been warned. In fact, I can bring some good news. The Austrian Wahlkabine ran out of money last year. Yeah, they cannot be part of the next elections, but it came back, supported by the universities of Vienna and Innsbruck. What could possibly go wrong? And the last generation actually decided to stop their protest, you may have noticed. And because in the beginning, parts of society demonstrated solidarity. Hello? Someone is speaking over there. Do you know this person? These two people are sitting in this lecture hall, actually. Ja. Da ist ein Lautsprecher. I'm done anyway. In another news, journalists still seem to like the story very much. Huh? This is from yesterday's Süddeutsche Zeitung, Aktivismus, die dunkle Seite der guten Sache. And we can actually see a reference to the study which I just presented to you. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much. So again, feel free to ask. Just raise your hand and I'll come over with the mic. Yeah, there's one.
You just said that the University of Innsbruck is also supporting the Wahlkabine. Is there any way that students of the University of Innsbruck can actually do something against that stuff, or where you can somehow reach out to the persons who are in charge for decisions like that?
As far as I know, things like Wahlomat and Wahlkabine are quite successful in reaching large audiences. I'm also aware that there are discussions about whether these machines do more harm than good. There's also a scientific discussion on how can we measure political orientation using proper measurement models. But what I can see in the field is mostly unidimensional left-right questionnaires, and I'm not very optimistic about it. For myself, I decided to not to use them and to make fun of it. But this is, of course, quite limited reach. Good ideas welcome.
Why do you think that we as a society have decided that this form of protest is not okay?
Can you elaborate what you mean that society has decided? I mean,
Well,
obviously, it's not allowed to. Well, the law is a bit different in Germany than in Austria. In Germany, sitting on a street and blocking the traffic is considered a crime. Here in Austria, I'm lacking the word. It's eine Ordnungswidrigkeit. So you basically get a fine for not having told the police that you organize a political demonstration. So you have to pay a little fine for having forgotten to mention it. The thing is that this switch into, or the choice of methods that are not completely legal is a deliberate choice to underline the importance of the topic. So that, for example, if you organize a, let's say, demonstration in Innsbruck in which you express concerns about the climate crisis, you may be lucky to be mentioned, let's say, in the local newspaper, but no one will notice. And I mean, climate activists say, we have tried all this stuff already. So their decision was to use illegal methods to more or less raise public awareness of this topic. And their argument is that the problem is so severe that it's in a moral way justified to break these rules. But this is not a proper response to what you actually asked. So
my question was rather, why are we deciding or questioning the sanity of these people during protest and asking if they're bad people or dark people or are narcissists instead of taking them seriously or actually starting a discussion now, as we should do in a democracy?
I'm not sure if, let's say, the authors of this study really have a political agenda to discredit climate change. My hypothesis, or the most parsimonious explanation, would be that this topic has some this topic probably resonates in the media. The personality of activists seems to be something which is easily assessed and easily published, and I guess the scientific, let's call it science capitalism, rewards many publications, and I mean, it's an easy way to get another one and also to appear in the media. So there may be more than this, but I would probably refrain from imputing some kind of political agenda behind this kind of research.
Okay.
There's a question. Maybe one question from my side. You mentioned it's dangerous to link things together which are not linked. So everything is related to everything. That's right. And also from a scientific point of view, it's correct. Now in the age of AI, it's often tried to do so. So AI does exactly this, and sometimes with some danger in shortcuts. That's what you showed in your slide, where things are related, but in fact they are not. But on the other hand, in some cases, AI may find correlations which humans won't find. So in a huge amount of data, there might be some information hidden, which humans don't think about, but they might come up. So we should be aware to prove them and to check it out if it's really correct. But maybe in some cases it really could help to search for relations from all to everything. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, my response has two facets. The first one is, of course, if you put more variables in a statistical model, you will increase you will improve the prediction of the model. So you can actually improve prediction, but of course you can't really improve explanation. So it's a difference between the statistical endeavor and the intellectual endeavor. And the other thing that we keep forgetting is the large topic of overfitting. If we throw a lot of explanatory variables in a regression model, we also fit our regression or statistical models into the errors, into the measurement errors of our data. So, and this aspect increases the more variables we have. So if we do something which is called a cross-validation, that means we use the model that we have found in one part of the data and try to predict outcomes in another part of the data for which the model was not trained, then often these highly complex models, their explanatory, their predictive power breaks down to chance prediction. Yeah? And I'm not sure whether in all these wonderful stories about artificial intelligence that we read in the newspapers from day to day, how much of this is overfitting, so that we see impressive findings in a given set of data, but the complete thing is useless if you leave this bubble of your own data and try to predict new things.
Overfitting and sometimes shortcutting. That's also often an error. Yeah. Further questions? Don't see. Also in the chat, there's no. So from the online participants, if you have questions, just type in the chat. There's no one. Yeah. Well, then I would say thank you very much for coming. Thank you to all of you for discussion. And yeah, that was the very last for this semester, but you're welcome also in the upcoming summer semester. We also have interesting lectures in this upcoming semester. And then don't forget to upload your tasks on your participant folder if you want to take part. And if you have any questions, just write me an email or give me a phone. So thank you again for coming. Thank you for the presentations. And see you next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you too.